Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 15, Text 34. Tadvam amushya paramasya vikuntha bhartu kartum prakrishtammiha dhimahi mandadhivyam lokannito vrachatamantara bhava drishtya papiya sastraya ime ripavosya yatra tadvam amushya paramasya vikuntha bhartu kartum prakrishtammiha dhimahi mandadhivyam lokanito vrajatamantara bhava drishtya papiya sastraya ime ripavosya yatra tadvam amushya paramasya vikuntha bhartuh kartum prakrishtammiha dhimahi mandadhivyam lokanito vrajatamantara bhava drishtya papiya sastraya ime ripavosya yatra tadvam amushya paramasya vikuntha bhartuh kartum prakrishtammiha dhimahi mandadhivyam lokanito vrajatamantara bhava drishtya papiya sastraya ime ripavosya yatra tadvam amushya paramasya vikuntha bhartuh kartum prakrishtammiha dhimahi mandadhivyam lokanito vrajatamantara bhava drishtya papiya sastraya ime ripavosya yatra tadvam amushya paramasya vikuntha bhartuh kartum prakrishtammiha dhimahi mandadhivyam lokanito vrajatamantara bhava drishtya papiya sastraya ime ripavosya yatra tadvam amushya paramasya vikuntha bhartuh kartum prakrishtammiha dhimahi mandadhivyam lokanito vrajatamantara bhava drishtya papiya sastraya ime ripavosya yatra Tadvamamushya paramasya Vaikuntha bhartuhu. Lutum prakrishtammiha dhimahi mandadibhyam. Lokanito vrajatamantara bhavadrishtya. Papiya sastraya ime ripavosayatra. Tat, therefore, Vam, unto these two, Amushya, of him, Paramasya, the Supreme, Vaikuntha bhartuhu, the Lord of Vaikuntha, Kartum, to bestow, Prakrishtam, benefit, Iha, in the matter of this offense, Dhimahi, let us consider, Mandadhibhyam, those whose intelligence is not very nice, Lokan, to the material world, Itaha, from this place Vaikuntha, Vrajatam, go, Antara bhava, duality, Drishtya, on account of seeing, Papi yassaha, sinful, Trayaha, three, Ime, these, Ripavaha, enemies, Asya, of a living entity, Yatra, where. Translation. Therefore, let us consider how these two contaminated persons should be punished. The punishment should be apt, for thus benefit can eventually be bestowed upon them. Since they find duality in the existence of Vaikuntha life, they are contaminated and should be removed from this place to the material world, where the living entities have three kinds of enemies. Purport. The reason why pure souls come into the existential circumstances of the material world, which is considered to be the criminal department of the Supreme Lord, is stated in the Bhagavad Gita, 7th chapter, verse 27. It is stated that as long as a living entity is pure, he is in complete harmony with the desires of the Supreme Lord. But as soon as he becomes impure, he is in disharmony with the desires of the Lord. By contamination, he is forced to transfer to this material world, where the living entities have three enemies, namely desire, anger, and lust. These three enemies force the living entities to continue material existence, and one is free from them, he is eligible to enter the kingdom of God. One should not, therefore, be angry in the absence of an opportunity for sense gratification, and one should not be lusty to acquire more than necessary. In this verse, it is clearly stated that the two doormen should be sent into the material world, where criminals are allowed to reside. Since the basic principles of criminality are sense gratification, anger, and unnecessary lust, persons conducted by these three enemies of the living entity are never promoted to Vaikuntha Loka. People should learn Bhagavad Gita and accept the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, as the Supreme Lord of everything. They should practice satisfying the senses of the Supreme Lord instead of trying to satisfy their own senses. Training in Krishna consciousness will help one be promoted to Vaikuntha. And again, the translation. Therefore, let us consider how these two contaminated persons should be punished. The punishment should be apt, for thus benefit can eventually be bestowed upon them. Since they find duality in the existence of Vaikuntha life, they are contaminated and should be removed from this place to the material world, where the living entities have three kinds of enemies. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai. Om Jnanatimirandhasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadama Hyam Dadati Svapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guroho Shri Utapada Kamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhan Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindho Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Namo Mahavadanyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namne Gauratushe Namaha Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So, today we are continuing this reading of this very famous pastime in Srimad Bhagavatam. Of course, this is, if you will, the initial climax of the pastime. This is, if you will, when the tension begins, really. We've been building up to the tension, and now it's really all coming out in the curse, right? Soon, of course, the curse will be clarified, and then we'll sort of have a resolution. But this is the point, of course, in the narrative where it's all a little bit scary, right? Because who's getting cursed? Who are getting cursed? Jai and Vijay, right? And as we know, that curse lasts for a long while, right? So, and when we're hearing they're being cursed by great sages, we know even by ungreat sages, curses are rather severe, right? In the example of Maharaj Parikshit, right? He wasn't really cursed by the most elevated of sages. In fact, Srila Prabhupada writes that at this point Kali Yuga truly begins, because this is the point when ego has entered and pride has entered into the Brahmins, right? And because of this, Kali Yuga can truly be said to begin. So Prabhupada writes like that. So we can think that Maharaj Parikshit, he's not been cursed by the most elevated person, and yet that curse very much spells his end. However, it's not his end at all, as is often pointed out, right? He was cursed to die in a week, right? And what does he decide to do? He wishes to hear Srimad Bhagavatam. He wishes to hear this elevated science. And therefore we can't really say his curse is a curse at all, right? Instead we can say it's some healthy encouragement in his Krishna consciousness, right? We can compare that to the demonic mindset, of course. Kamsa, right? He gets not even cursed, he just gets told, at some point or another in the next 8 years or so, you're going to die. And what does he do? Does he sit down and think, now is my time to hear Srimad Bhagavatam? Now is my time to meditate on the form of the Supreme Lord? No, Kamsa has a very big hissy fit, really, right? He goes all out and he kills all of these children, even the ones who he knows aren't going to be the cause of his demise. So there we can see, right? Curses and blessings really are relative, right? Kamsa, he takes what is a general announcement as a very severe curse and he panics. This is the demonic mindset, right? And Parikshit Maharaj, he takes what is very explicitly a curse, right? And he uses it and takes it to be a blessing. This is where we can see the contrast of the demonic and devotional mindsets, right? Very, very different. So, in a similar way, we can see that even though this is a very severe curse, almost, right? Because of, as we know, the four Kumaras, they are not insignificant personalities, right? Their austerities are not very empty, and their realization, while at this point not yet complete, is definitely not empty, right? So we can see that this is a curse that is causing, a bit of distress, right? At this point, we should be a little worried for Jai and Vijay. My spiritual master, he says, when we read Srimad Bhagavatam, we often read it and we see the long descriptions, right? There's chapters which are describing almost to no end, right? So many details. And especially, I find devotees really encounter this the first time when we're reading first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam and we hear about Krishna's return to Dwarka, right? Then we're hearing such long, long descriptions. And my spiritual master, he was saying that actually when we are reading such things, it's not just there because because Shukadev Goswami, he's deciding to hit a word quota, right? He's not trying to fill up a certain amount of verses so that this can be considered Srimad Bhagavatam. He's doing this because actually we can say he's being very terse, right? There's so much more he could have said, right? This is his very compact explanation of the pastimes. But he's doing this so that we can visualize it, right? So that we can see within our mind's cinema, right? See within the image in our mind these pastimes, right? Because poetry and these sort of descriptions, they're given to us in order that we can immerse ourselves in the pastimes. So when we read these things, we should try to meditate. Ever since hearing that from my spiritual master, that's something I've done in my personal reading. I'll do my regular reading, which is more for study, but then I'll also just read really slowly through one chapter, and I'll try to take in each detail, and I'll read one line, each description, and I'll try and add that to my mental image, and then I'll read the next description and the next detail, and then I'll try and build up like a very solid mental image as Srimad Bhagavatam is trying to paint in our minds. So, I was mentioning that to say that we can almost imagine, right, when we are thinking at this point, right, we can almost imagine the shock on people's faces as this is being spoken, right? We can imagine the tension in the air as they're speaking it. Actually, I was thinking when we were reciting the text, this is such a melodic text, right? I was thinking it really flows really sweetly off the tongue, and and yet what does it mean? It's talking about cursing people away into the place of the of the three kinds of enemies, right? So anyways, so we can think like this, how severe it is, right? But we hear there is a slight benefit here, right? Because what is it said, right? The punishment should be apt, for thus benefit can eventually be bestowed upon them. And we find this throughout. When saintly people curse, it is not the same way that demonic people curse, right? They curse with a slight benefit entailed. Actually, His Holiness Gaur Govinda Maharaj, he always says that the curse of the devotee or the curse of the sadhu is always a blessing. We see the same thing with the Arjuna trees that are cursed, right? In Krishna's pastimes, right? What happens to them? Such a great blessing they have that very few others can. So, like this we see, and actually it's described, I was hearing when Rasananda Prabhu, he was describing in some of his classes, he was describing the past lives of a lot of the demons and all. That's all described in Garga Samhita, right? And in Garga Samhita we'll see so many demonic personalities, they're there because of a curse, right? But that curse has given them one. It's given them the opportunity to fight with Krishna. And what greater opportunity is there than that? So we see the curses, they're often very positive. And, as again, in the example of Kamsa, or rather in the example of Parikshit Maharaj, even if it's not done with positive intent, there can be nothing that can actually hurt the devotee, right? Because the devotee engages everything in Krishna consciousness. I sometimes think of this. Parikshit Maharaj is the greatest example of Yukta Vairagya, because he's taken even a curse that's been attributed to him and he's used it in the service of Krishna. Actually, it's described like that in the Skanda Purana. There was the wives of Krishna in Dwarka. They didn't disappear as quickly as some of the other associates and devotees of Krishna did. And it's described that actually they were very much lamenting. They're very much upset. They were thinking, we're having no association of Krishna. Where is he gone, right? How can we even exist? This is such a painful condition. And so it's described, they sort of brainstorm, what do we do? And they decide, let's go to Uddhava, right? Because Uddhava, he knew Krishna so well, right? Uddhava, he will be able to help us, right? They have that Dwarka mood, right? So they go, and they think, where can we find him? So they end up going around, and they think, we should go to that blade of grass, right? Which Uddhava has desired to become, right? We should go to there in Vrindavan. And it's a long pastime, I won't get into all the details, but they eventually go, and then they see him, and they explain their issue. And Uddhava, he says, okay, I will speak the Srimad Bhagavatam to you. I will speak this Bhagavat Purana to you. I'll speak it to all of you, except to you, Parikshit Maharaj. To you, I will not. Because you later on will have to hear the Srimad Bhagavatam. You later on will have to hear it. And you'll have to hear it in a way that will deliver all of Kali Yuga. Right? The rest of you can hear and relish, but it is not your time yet to hear it. Later on, you will have the opportunity to do so. And when you do, it'll be for the benefit of all people. We can think of the same thing as the Bhagavad Gita. What does Krishna say to Arjuna? Does he say, take us away from all the armies? Let's go to a private place? No, the private place discussions are saved for Gaur Leela, when they come back as Rai Ramananda and Mahaprabhu, right? But this Bhagavad Gita, what does he say? Madhye, right? Right in the middle of the armies, we will speak this Bhagavad Gita for the benefit of all people. And in the same way, we have Srimad Bhagavatam. So, there we find, not only is Parikshit Maharaj an example of Yukta Vairagya, but also of preaching, right? So nicely there, he is preaching. He has invited all the sages, that all the sages, in fact, can be elevated by hearing Srimad Bhagavatam, right? And then not only that, but then that can be recited later on, and then we can so wonderfully have the Srimad Bhagavatam that we have recorded with us today. So anyway, so like this, we see that there is some benefit to be had. And yet, we may wonder why this curse was spoken at all. Of course, we know, at this point, the four Kumaras, they're somewhat of impersonalists, right? We hear in the Bhagavad Gita that there's the four types of people who surrender to Krishna, right? Who are they? The distressed, yeah? The inquisitive, yeah? The jigyasu. Then there's, the jnani. And then there's the one who's interested in wealth, artha-arthi, right? So we have these four, right? And they all come towards Krishna. And often we find it described that each one of the four is exemplified in different personalities from Srimad Bhagavatam, right? Of course, the distressed is Gajendra, right? Who are the others? Do we know? Sorry? Yeah, Dhruva Maharaj, he is the one after wealth. Sages of Namisharanya who are inquisitive. And then the four Kumaras, they're the Gyanis, right? It's interesting because in some Acharya's commentaries it says that the first three, from the one in distress, the inquisitive, and the one seeking wealth, they're all Karma Mishra Bhakti, right? And then, of course, the last are Jnana Mishra Bhakti. But it's interesting because Krishna's Kaviraj Thakur in Chaitanya Charitamrita, he actually writes that the Jigyasu and the Jnani, they are in Jnana Mishra Bhakti, and the other two are in Karma Mishra Bhakti. So, not to cause an existential crisis, it's not I don't think that's a faith-destroying contradiction. They're both emphasizing different aspects, right? Because the Jigyasu, he's after more material knowledge, right? He just wants knowledge in general. Whereas the Jnani has some understanding of knowledge now. And because he has some understanding, he or she has some understanding, right? Because he or she has some understanding, then he understands, oh, I should go to Krishna to have greater knowledge, right? So that's why we can have that distinction. In one sense, is more in the karma mishra aspect, because there's still that material attachment, that there's material desires, right? It's knowledge in the sense of sense gratification. But on the other hand, it also is jnana mishra bhakti, because it's very quickly going to become a purified form. So anyway, so we see this, right? And so the example that's given for the Jnanis is the four Kumaras, right? And so they're considered the greatest of the four, right? We know Krishna says immediately after he lists them, he says the best of all of these are the Jnanis. And then almost so as to not hurt the feelings of the other three in the text after, he says, but I like the other ones as well. So we see this, right? And so there they are. And there's some mixture. But we hear that these are the most cherished, right, of the four. And there's different descriptions given why this is the case, right? Some acharyas say that the reason why this is the case is because, well, the Jnana Mishra Bhakta, he is free from attachments, right? Nishkama Karma Yoga has it's been finished, you know. He's on the platform where he doesn't have too many material attachments. And therefore he can execute devotional service rather simply, right? Rather easily. The others, they sort of get a little disturbed. Once they get what they want, then they're sort of freed. Whenever I think of the devotee in distress, I remember my mother, she was saying, we all, I think all of us have been to Mayapur at one point, or at least most of us have been to Mayapur at one point, and we know, right, in the summer it's a little humid, right? It's a little bit of a difficult temperature, especially in parikrama time, right? It's a real austerity. Mahaprabhu is really giving the mercy of severe humidity, right? So we've all experienced this, or at least we can have some conception of it. My mother, she was telling me during parikrama time, after the parikrama ended, she was there in the temple room, and everyone was coming in, and it was during the japa time, so she was chanting her rounds. And she saw this one devotee come in, right? He clearly just come up from parikrama, you could see, right? And he came in, and he did dandavat pranams to Panchatattva, right? And he did these elongated dandavat pranams. And my mother was thinking, what a revered devotee, He's giving such sweet dandavat pranams. He's really putting his heart into this. He's really, such sweet obeisances he's giving. He's just completely laying down and surrendering himself to the Supreme Lord. And then she's thinking, wow, he's surrendering himself for a few minutes now. And so at one point, one of the guards had to come over and wake him up. He had fallen asleep because the marble tiles are so cool, right? The marble tiles are so cool that after the long parikrama in the humidity, he had fallen asleep in the temple room. So I always think this is an example. He has surrendered because of distress. He has surrendered because of suffering, right? Very nice surrender. Anyway, so we find that these are all the different categories. But why the Jnani is considered so worshipable, so esteemed? Some acharyas say, because it's stable, right? And the others, they'll get what they want, and then maybe they'll stop chanting their rounds, and then, they'll always come back to it. There's no loss or diminution on the path of bhakti. It's not that they will lose their taste, but they're not so stable. Whereas the Jnana Mishra Bhakta, they're more stable. But it's also described that they are very close to becoming full bhaktas, right? They are very close to entering the full level of devotion. We'll get to that later on in this chapter, right? They are much, much closer to getting into pure devotion. And it's described by Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, actually, because what does Krishna say in that text? He says, for the Jnani is the greatest of all of these, and I'm very dear to him, and he is very dear to me, right? This is described. And Chakravarti Thakur, he says that Krishna here, he's saying that he takes the Jnani and he holds him on the same level as himself, right? He's given him equality. That is why that description is there. It's implying an equality. He takes the Jnana Mishra Bhakta and he says, he is on the same level as me. So then Chakravarti Thakur, he says, naturally, what is understanding then, right? If one then abandons the Jnana Mishra, if one then abandons the Jnana Mishra, if one then gets to pure, anyabhilashita shunyam, jnana karmadhyanavritam, right? When one abandons the jnana, what then can happen? But Krishna himself takes that devotee and places it as higher than himself. This is the position of the pure, unalloyed devotee, right? So this is what Chakravarti Thakur says. If equality is what is granted to the Jnana Mishra Bhakta, then what about the Shuddha Bhakta? What about the devotee in pure devotional service, right? What about the pure devotee? And we can see that this is the opportunity that is opened up to Jai and Vijay, right? Already they're in the Vaikuntha planets, right? Srila Prabhupada, he says in another purport, I think it's in this canto, he says that we should not consider this fall to be like a regular fall, right? This is the fall of elevated personalities, actually. This is a pastime fall. This is not like the standard one, right? This is one that is acted out, right, as a pastime. So we should not think that they have made, that they are not in a pure condition. However, we will see that they do change conditions. And so they are given, again, benefit. And actually they're given quite the greatest benefit, right? Jai and Vijay. And what benefit are they given, right? Well, we know what is their first birth, right? Their first birth, after they leave, they're Hiranyaksha in Hiranyakashipu, right? Very, very famous. And both die. Varahadev takes out Hiranyaksha, and Hiranyakashipu is taken out by Nrsingadev, right? And then, of course, they're not, well, then they take another birth. Again, people sometimes wonder, how can this be the case, right? If one is killed by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, they should attain liberation. But of course, it's described for two reasons. One, that they're cursed, and another is that they didn't really realize they're being killed by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, right? It's described that actually when Hiranyakashipu, when he saw Nrsingadev He was just confused. He was thinking, well, is he a lion? Is he a man? What's going on? He's coming out of a pillar. What's happening? And then he just jumps into fighting, right? And he doesn't really meditate or think that, oh, I'm being killed by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, right? Same thing with Ramchandra. He's thinking, who is this person trying to take my wife, right? Who is this person shooting arrows at me, right? Why can't he leave me alone, right? He's sort of thinking like this. He isn't really meditating. But what we do see is we see a development, right? We see a development both in Hiranyaksha and Hiranyakashipu and in their understanding of Krishna consciousness. Krishna consciousness is a very broad term. Sometimes we can get confused. I know definitely going through Bhakti Shastri now with my students, they're always getting confused with, why is Prabhupada calling this Krishna consciousness? Why is Prabhupada calling this Krishna consciousness? Because we have this understanding, right? That Krishna consciousness means, again, entirely anyabhilashita shunyam. And it definitely does include that, right? Bhakti Ruttama. But we also find Prabhupada in his purports, he'll describe that even Brahman realization is Krishna consciousness. Because it's partial Krishna consciousness, but it's still Krishna consciousness, because the Brahman effulgence is still Krishna, right? So anyway, so they're developing and growing in their Krishna consciousness, right? And they themselves are also changing. It's one thing you can note, right? At the beginning, they're like these big, big demons, right? And then they become a little weaker, and then at the end, they're Dantavakra and Shishupal, right? So their demonic ability is actually decreasing, right? At the beginning, they're like these really strong, powerful demons, right? And they need the giant boar and the, half man, half lion incarnations to kill them, right? At the end, they're just, Shishupal, right? Shishupal isn't exactly as menacing as Hiranyakashipu is, right? So we see this, right? So we see that development there. We can see their demonic tendencies, in one sense, decreasing. But why is it decreasing? Because in the other sense, their meditation on the Lord is increasing, right? Their Krishna consciousness is increasing. This is what's said. Shishupal, when he's insulting Krishna, he's giving such nice glorifications indirectly, right? We can read all of his insults actually as a glorification of Krishna, right? Because so long he has to meditate on Krishna, right? And on Krishna's qualities, now he has some realization, right? Now he has some understanding, right? Now he has some Krishna consciousness. And that's why we hear in the beginning of 7th canto, when he's being killed, right? What do we hear? Do we hear about his evil? No, we hear about his glories, right? Because he's had time to digest these qualities of Krishna, right? So we know, right? Hiranyakashipu, then Ravana, then Shishupal, right? And is that the last one? Is that the last birth they take? No. It's a little unclear about how they take their next birth, which is, of course, Jagai and Madhai, right? Actually, I remember Jagai and Madhai's pastimes are so very popular, right? Everyone loves them. And even in the broader culture in India, I find if you talk about Mahaprabhu, if anyone knows about any of Mahaprabhu's pastimes at all, they tend to know Jagai and Madhai. I still remember I bought my grandmother Chaitanya Bhagavat, right? Because Chaitanya Bhagavat's very easy, the Bengali, it's very simple. Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur actually said this for native Bengali speakers. They should read Chaitanya Bhagavat. That was his big book for book distribution. Because simple Bengali, and yet, of course, it's giving such high philosophy, right? So I gave my grandmother Chaitanya Bhagavat. And in the morning, I got up and I saw she was reading Jagai Madhai. I was thinking, wow, you're shooting through this book, reading really quickly. And then the next morning, I was thinking, where are you up to? And then she showed me, Jagai and Madhai. And then the next morning, I was asking, where are you up to now? And she showed me Jagai and Madhai. And I realized she's just reading that one chapter on loop. So it's very, very popular in the collective imagination. And for good reason, right? But in Gurgana Desha Deepika, it's described that actually, Jain Vijay, this is no longer a curse or some extra benefit. They do it of their own volition. They do it of their own desire. Of their own desire, they take birth as Jagai and Madhai. They sort of think, fighting with the Supreme Lord was so much fun in his pastimes. I want a bit more of it, right? So they sort of think like this, right? And so of their own volition, of their own desire, they take birth as Jagai and Madhai, right? So they take that sort of position. And as we know, Jagai and Madhai, they get a very special position. And we see, of course, because Gaur Leela is Krishna Leela, right? So it wouldn't really be complete without them anyways. Yeah, we can almost say that, it wouldn't have been quite the same. That being said, just as a little side note, it is mentioned by Jiva Goswami that it's not that Jai and Vijay are always enacting this pastime. Other times when Hiranyakashipu is there, it's not giant Vijay acting out the roles of Hiranyakashipu and Hiranyaksha. This is a one-off pastime, if you will, or a rare pastime, right? It's not that every single time they get cursed, they come down, they act out these pastimes, they get killed, and they go back. Sometimes it's other jivas. It's only this time, right, that we're seeing this. Because we see, again, varieties in Krishna's pastimes. In Brihad Bhagavatamrita, it's described that sometimes Krishna, he dances on Kaliya's heads, right, on Kaliya's heads, and then afterwards he rides Kaliya to go kill Kamsa. In some pastimes it happens like this, right? So we can see there's varieties in pastimes. So it's not always giant Vijay who are acting these out. This is one variety of the pastime, right? Because it's considered, I won't get into it. He quotes from all different cantos trying to explain that it would be inappropriate to consider that they're continuously getting cursed, right? So they're there in this position. We see all of the pastimes of Krishna, right? Again, we always emphasize, Mahaprabhu is not an incarnation of Krishna, right? In one sense he is, right? And Prabhupada and our acharyas will say he is. But in the other sense, he is also quite literally Krishna himself, right? And Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada, he always emphasizes, Krishna's incarnation is not a solitary event. It is a social event. It is there. When Krishna appears, he appears with all of his devotees, right? Because if he does not appear with his devotees, then it is not Krishna appearing, right? Krishna cannot appear without his devotees. So naturally, when Krishna appears, all his associates appear with him, right? But we can sometimes ask, right? Vrindavan is non-different to Navadvip, right? But we don't find all of the devotees of Vrindavan incarnating in Navadvip, right? Who is Rai Ramananda? Vishaka. Or sometimes Lalita. It goes both ways, right? And Rai Ramananda, he's not in Navadvip. Mahaprabhu has to take sannyas. I was mentioning a few weeks ago, right? He has to take sannyas just to go visit him, right? So, we can wonder this, right? Why are they appearing outside of the Dham? I asked this question. Now I've forgotten who, but it was a senior devotee. I was asking. And he was explaining, we find in Mahaprabhu's pastime something very unique, right? Mahaprabhu is what? Patita Pavana. And can we say that any incarnation or any other aspect of the Lord, right, is Patita Pavana more than Mahaprabhu? We cannot. Because who is Mahaprabhu preaching to? Who is Mahaprabhu distributing his mercy to? To the most fallen people. And yet what is he giving? He's giving the most elevated and highest forms of bhakti, right? Bhakti which is very, very rare to attain. So he's giving the highest of things to the lowest of people, right? Actually, we could not call Krishna Patita Pavana if Mahaprabhu did not exist, if Mahaprabhu's pastimes did not occur, right? Shivaram Maharaj, he makes this point. If one rejects Mahaprabhu, they have rejected Krishna, because Krishna cannot be God if Mahaprabhu is not Krishna. Because we see this, Krishna cannot be Patita Pavana without Mahaprabhu giving the highest thing to the lowest of people. Also, Krishna cannot be Rasaraj. He cannot be the king of all rasas if he has not tasted the rasa of the devotee. So we cannot say Krishna's whole claim to divinity, we say that Krishna is a non-sectarian form, right? Forms, often people hear form of the Lord and they think of something sectarian. But Krishna is the non-sectarian form of the Lord because he's including all other rasas. It's not a sectarian proclamation. It's saying all of the beauty and all of the rasas and all the mellows are found in Krishna, right? And if we can say there is a mellow that is not experienced by Krishna, then we can no longer make our claim, and then we're just another bunch of sectarian dogmatists. But because of Mahaprabhu's pastimes, we can say very much that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, right? And we can say so with full conviction. But without Mahaprabhu, we enter into a very difficult situation, right? Anyways, so we find this, Mahaprabhu, he is Patita Pavana, right? He is distributing this Sankirtan, right? And this Sankirtan is very unique to Mahaprabhu, right? Of course, in other Kali Yugas, does Mahaprabhu appear? No, right? Only once in the day of Brahma he appears, right? So in other Kali Yugas, we see the Sankirtan mission, it still begins, right? There's a Shakti Avesh avatar who will establish it, right? Empowered, he'll start it because it's the Yuga Dharma, right? It's not that in other Kali Yugas, the Yuga Dharma is, yagyas still, or is something else, right? It very much is always the Yuga Dharma. But we find it is very unique to Mahaprabhu, right? There's something very unique with Sankirtan to Mahaprabhu. We find this with Maharaj Prataprudra, right? We know Mahaprabhu, they had to jump through infinite hoops in order to have some sort of nectar from Mahaprabhu poured onto him, right? But eventually, when he was able to see Mahaprabhu, right, he was up there with Gopinathacharya and Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, right? And together, they were watching, and they saw Mahaprabhu arriving, right? And we hear this wonderful description in Chaitanya Charitamrita, right? And he's saying, look at this personality, look how effulgent Advaita Acharya is, look how effulgent this devotee is. And he's completely enraptured. And then he asks a question. And his question is, well, what is this, right? I've never heard something so beautiful. I've never seen something so beautiful. And of course, we must remember, Chaitanya Charitamrita is written in a time when people knew the position of Maharaj Prataprudra. When they would hear this, statement being said, they would know that he is in charge of Jagannath Puri. He is there in this area. And if you study Jagannath Puri, you will see that Jagannath Puri has every single type of religion available there. Every type of spirituality is available there. If we see who is worshipping Jagannath, who is engaging in the worship of Jagannath, it's everyone. There are Muslims who are engaged in worship of Jagannath. There are Christians who are engaged in worship of Jagannath. There are Buddhists who are engaged in worship of Jagannath. There are Sahajiyas who are unfortunately engaged in worship of Jagannath, right? There are all sorts that are engaged in the worship of Jagannath. Impersonalists that come there, right? Devotees, Nrsingadev come there. And they all say, oh, he is the incarnation of my Ishtadev, right? They all say this. The impersonalists will come and they'll say, oh, Jagannath is very black because he represents the impersonal void. And we can all say, no thank you. He is very dark because he's having the beautiful shams on the skin of Krishna, right? But you'll find all sorts of moods are present there. So when Maharaj Prataprudra says, I've never seen anything like this, it is no small claim. He's saying, I've seen all the varieties of spiritual expression, and yet I've never seen anything like this. This is something very special. What does Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya say? Let me see if I can remember the text. Bhattacharya kohe, e madhur bachon, right? E madhur bachon, this beautiful sound you are hearing. Chaitanya shrishti e prema sankirtan, right? This is Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's shrishti, right? What does shrishti mean? We hear about the shrishti lila of the Lord. What is the shrishti lila? The creation, right? When Mahavishnu is expanding out and manifesting the Mahatattva, this is a Shrishti Lila, right? So this is when the manifestation of something. So what is it when we see Chaitanya Mahaprabhu? What is his Shrishti? What is his Shrishti Lila? It is the manifestation of this Prema Sankirtan. Not just the Sankirtan, but the Prema Sankirtan, right? So he's giving something very elevated, something very high, right? Not just Sankirtan, but Prema Sankirtan. This is what, again, we should not think that Krishna's Kaviraj Thakur has included this word in order to get his word count up, right? He has not done this. He has done this for a specific reason. He is specifying here is Prema Sankirtan, something very unique. The holy name that we chant, right, is imbued with this very, very special mood. The Maha Mantra is valuable all the time. We cannot diminish any of its value, right? But when we are chanting it under the mercy of Srila Prabhupada, right? What is Srila Prabhupada's pranam mantra? Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine, right? This Gauravani, this message, this teaching of Mahaprabhu is there. And what is it? It is the Prema Sankirtan. Very special, right? Because it is Chaitanya Shrishti, right? It is Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's Shrishti. It is his creation. It is his manifestation. He has manifested it. He has created it. And when he comes to give it, it is very, very special, right? And of course, we are so fortunate to have received it from Srila Prabhupada, right? So in that sense, we can say Patita Pavana is a title that is so nicely inherited by all of those who are preaching this Prema Sankirtan, right? Because this preaching of the Prema Sankirtan is how Mahaprabhu is Patita Pavana, right? So we find all of this. Anyway, so I was making the point, right, that why Mahaprabhu, when Mahaprabhu's pastimes come, we see all of the associates from the Vraj Leela, they're scattered around everywhere. They're not just in Navadvip. It is because Mahaprabhu is Patita Pavana, right? What in Mahaprabhu's pastimes we know when we go to Vrindavan, you can feel it on your shoulders, I've told many devotees, and every devotee has said, when you're in Vrindavan, you feel the heaviness on your shoulders. When you're walking around, you really, really feel it, right? You think, already I'm too sinful to be in Australia, let alone here. So, you're walking around, you feel the weight of Vrindavan, right? You can feel it, especially when you're going through and you're, Vrindavan, very, very heavy place, right? It's in the atmosphere, right? But then when you go to Mayapur, you feel like you're 10 kilos lighter, right? Actually, when I went on parikrama there, I got a stomach bug, so I was quite literally 10 kilos lighter. But so we see, you feel light, right? Because in Mahaprabhu's pastimes, the mercy is there. But all of that sweetness that's there in Vrindavan, all of that intensity, it's still there. We can't say that Navadvip is the, reject store version or something, that it's like the secondary version. We shouldn't say. And we would imply that by saying that Navadvip is cheaper, right? That Navadvip is somehow not having that intensity. Navadvip has the same intensity of Vrindavan. It has that same sweetness, right? But it's been opened up, right? It's being exploded up, right? It's sometimes said, again, Mahaprabhu's pastimes and Krishna's pastimes, they're one and the same, right? So the Ras Leela, right? Something that, I won't say any more about it than mentioning its name, right? And maybe one day I'll be able to hear more about it than just hearing its name, right? The Ras Leela, so elevated. But we hear that in Mahaprabhu's pastimes, the Ras Leela is Mahaprabhu dancing at the Ratha Yatra, right? And that is going from something that was, is very secluded, and it's opened up, right? It's opened up there for everyone to see, right? And all of that nectar is pouring out. So again, Krishna's associates, they're scattered around. Why? Because Mahaprabhu, he is opening up that mercy. He is opening up that domain. He's opening up that domain of all of these intimate, esoteric pastimes, right? He's opening up all of that domain of mercy. He's opening up all of that, right? What does Srila Prabhupada write in Bhagavad Gita? He writes in chapter 8, I think. He says, wherever this Krishna consciousness is practiced, there the atmosphere of Vrindavan has manifested, right? And this is what Mahaprabhu is doing, right? In his pastimes, that atmosphere of Vrindavan, that atmosphere is being manifested all over. Wherever he's going, it's opened up. Vrindavan is a sealed box, but Navadvip is like an opening lotus, right? It's opening up. And it's opening up so much, eventually, hopefully, it'll consume the whole universe, right? This is also the specific potency of the Sankirtan Yagya, right? It's a Yagya. And normally with Yagyas, you have a flame, right? And you can purify whatever you can fit into the flame. And then you have to purify a certain set amount of things, right? You can't just throw whatever you want in, right? You can't do whatever you want. You can't speculate with a Yagya, right? We know when Srila Prabhupada, we know the famous pastime Prabhupada, he was performing a Yagya for initiation for some of his new disciples, right? And he said, when I say Swaha, you throw the rice, right? Prabhupada, he said that, right? And so, as he was performing the yagya, he said, Swaha, and then they all threw the rice, and then Prabhupada paused, and he said, into the fire, not unto me. So, we can't really yagyas, they're complicated, right? And we can only engage in a certain way with certain things, right? But the Sankirtan yagya, it is a flame that burns where you can throw anything into it, right? Whatever you want to throw into it, you can, right? And it's relatively easy, right? No rules or regulations, right? There are no hard and fast rules. Of course, we have the 10 offenses, right? But that's about entering into the proper, that's about, how do I put it? That's something very different to stringent, arbitrary regulations. The 10 offenses tie into the mood of the holy name. They're not just about properly executing it, right? It's about welcoming the holy name appropriately, right? Slightly different concept, right? So we see, right? There are no hard and fast rules for this chanting. I had a dry throat. I slept with the window open and I'm suffering the consequences. There's no hard and fast rules, right? For chanting. So what do we see? This Sankirtan is like a fire and you can throw anything into it. This is what we see with Srila Prabhupada, right? Doing Ratha Yatra with a ute. Take I don't know, ute, whatever they call it in America, right? Take the ute and just throw it into the Sankirtan Yagya, right? Take a microphone and throw it into the Sankirtan Yagya. Take all of these people and throw them into the Sankirtan Yagya. This is the nature of the Sankirtan Yagya. It's expansive. And it expands and it consumes everything. And this is the sacrificial flame that doesn't burn out, right? It keeps on expanding and expanding and expanding and expanding, right? Just recently, there was this one famous Buddhist monk that passed away, and I saw lots of people were posting about it. And there was this very interesting quote that they were sharing about him, and it was how did it go? Obviously, it didn't enter into my shloka memorization regime. I'm trying to remember how it goes. A cloud never dies. It was something like that, right? And the point that he was making he was saying that even if I disappear, right? Even if I disappear, I was expecting it to be something Mayavad, right? You know, or impersonalist, right? I'll disappear, and then because I'm nothing anyways, it doesn't matter, something like that. But the point he was making was actually, he said, when the rain cloud goes, and the rain cloud, it travels, when it rains, new clouds are created from that rain, right? And that same cloud, that same water is passed through. And so it was actually a quote he was making to instruct his disciples, right? To instruct his disciples that you will continue me by following my instructions, right? That is what he was saying. And I was thinking about it. Normally I don't think too long about all sorts of other things, but I was thinking about how well that ties in to our understanding of the parampara, right? Because what is the mercy of each link of the parampara is that same mercy passed down, right? Mahaprabhu, he gives his mercy to the Goswamis, and the Goswamis give their mercy to their disciples, and like that. And it's the same mercy being passed down, right? And it's this chain of mercy, right? So again, this mercy of Mahaprabhu, this expansive Sankirtan, this mercy is continuously passing through. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur would always make this point. When we dance in the Kirtan, we are engaging in Mahaprabhu's Leelas, right? Because that same mercy Mahaprabhu is given is being captured by all of his associates. And all of his associates, having captured that nectar, have passed it on to their disciples. And then like this, on and on and on. So when we receive the mercy of any devotee, right, if it is legitimate mercy, it is the mercy of Mahaprabhu only, right? Because it's coming down like that, being passed down on and on and on, right? And so even then when we receive the mercy of all the other devotees, right, what are we receiving but the mercy of Mahaprabhu, right? Because what is the mercy that any of the other devotees have received? They've only received it through the Guru Parampara, right? That is the only way we're receiving mercy. And that mercy is originally that mercy of Mahaprabhu. And that's why we can see that mercy of Mahaprabhu is unlimited. Because as the Sankirtan grows, as it grows, we're not running out of mercy, thankfully. Otherwise I'd be in a tough position, right? We're seeing that mercy is infinite, right? And in that sense, Mahaprabhu is also Patita Pavana. Because again, his pastimes are expanding out. They're exploding out. They're consuming everything. And there we can see Mahaprabhu's compassion and mercy. He's not only giving the highest thing to the lowest of people, but he's giving it out infinitely. And it's spreading out and consuming everything. So that was a little bit of a tangent to my point. So Jai and Vijay, right? They've become Jagai and Madhai, right? And this is now the last ring, if you will, the last base before their home run back, right? And so they're there. And what happens, right? We know so famously, I won't go into the pastime because we're running out of time, but we know so famously what happens is they nearly receive a certain type of mercy from Mahaprabhu. The sort of mercy that they were used to, right? And we're seeing this. We know it's described, of course, that Radhanath Maharaj once said, as devotees, we often make the point that we don't believe in an eternal hell. And this idea makes very little sense to us. But he said, maybe Jagai and Madhai might have gotten an eternal hell. Maybe for them, there would have been an eternal time there, right? So long it was, it's actually described in some shastras that Yamaraj, when Chitragupta presented the list of sins, it's described that Yamaraj nearly passed out. Right? It's described he got a little faint-headed. He thought, how will I will spend all of my time even listing the punishment for them. Who's going to do all of the seva here? This is described, right? Yamaraj, he was very, very concerned. He was thinking, hopefully they live a very long life so I don't have to see them anytime soon, right? So Yamaraj, he was thinking like this. So many sins they'd committed, right? And so, right? How had they been used to? They'd been used to being relieved of their sins by the merciful slaying hand of the Lord, right? That is how they'd been used to it. And they were about to cop it again, right? But then, of course, we know Nityananda Prabhu, so mercifully he comes and he begs on their behalf, right? And then they become wonderful devotees. Jagannath Das and Madhava Das, I think. their initiated names are, right? They become these wonderful devotees like this, right? Under the begging of Nityananda Prabhu, right? And like this, we see, coming back to the point I was making, for thus benefit can eventually be bestowed upon them, right? What benefit did they receive, right? Being the doorkeepers of Vaikuntha is incredibly worshipable, right? We can take the dust of any Vaikunthavasi, right? And if we are lucky to get the dust of Vaikunthavasi, we can place it on our head. If we are fortunate, right? I mean, if we are fortunate, we can just take the dust in general of Vaikuntha, right, and put it on our head, and that would be a fortune, right? But still, there are relative positions, right? All the positions are worshipable, but some are greater than others. So, what is the position? What is the fortune? What is the mercy that was received by Jai and Vijay, right? The mercy that they received is that they begin as the doorkeepers to Vaikuntha, and at the end, they are associates in Mahaprabhu's pastimes, right? What a great mercy, right? And so we see, for devotees, there is no curse, right? There is no misfortune. There is only, again, Yukta Vairagya, I think, very much expands into the world of fortune, misfortune, cursings, and blessings. Of course, it's very easy to use blessings. we don't struggle with utilizing those. But what are we seeing here? Even in misfortune, even in curses, the devotee's attitude is always to make the best bet of a bad bargain. But even the bad bargains don't exist. Why? Because coming back to the point, why are they criticizing? Why are they criticizing the doorkeepers of Vaikuntha? They're criticizing them for existing in duality. But in devotional life, there exists no duality, right? Not in a Mayavad conception, but in a full conception. All that exists, right, is progress towards Krishna. That's all that exists. There is no duality. So even though they've criticized them for it, right now we are seeing that they are showing that, right? That curse is being used positively, right? That curse is being used in a positive, expansive manner. And therefore, we see in Jai and Vijay, they're very much embodying, right, the devotional attitude to truly transcend dualities. The grand irony is they're being cursed for apparently seeing duality, but actually we see in their pastimes that they fully embodied how to truly be transcendental to them in service to Krishna. Okay, Grantharaj, yeah? I don't know. I've never thought of that before. I have no idea. Yeah.
The other thing is, you mentioned about we actually say Srila Bhagavatam is the topmost Purana, spotless Amala Purana. Why is that we have to take references from the other 17 Puranas to call some clarify, to strengthen something, when Bhagavatam itself is the highest Purana?
I think your word is right. Like we're clarifying or we're elaborating, but ideally nothing we say is not from Bhagavatam, right? It's not just because Bhagavatam is perfect doesn't mean we, just because it's utmost doesn't mean we can't use other shastras, but it still has the utmost conclusion and the utmost purport. So if we read anything from any other shastra, we're reading it in light of the Bhagavatam, right? So we technically. It's not something I'd particularly recommend, but you could read everything, right? But as long as you're reading in the light of Bhagavatam, that's still what it means for it to be in the position of the Amalam Puranam, right? Because we read everything in light of the Bhagavatam, right? And nothing else is proposing anything new or anything different than's already there in the Bhagavatam, right? You might find some detail for a pastime here and there, but you see the same thing, like our acharyas, they've written commentaries and they've added details here or there that they've found in their realization. But they're never adding any new philosophical conception or anything that's brand new. The message of the Bhagavad is the highest message. And everything is there implicitly, if you get what I mean. Even when they're commenting and they're adding these details, you see, interestingly enough, they'll always refer